Good afternoon. I'm Justin Scarborough, and I'm a data analyst supporting Lockheed Martin's training and logistics line of business. Today, I'll be discussing Traeser and the Training Enterprise Digital Twin and how we support decision making for the training factory. I'm going to start off first by talking about why we think about using discrete simulation for training. I'm going to provide an overview for the Training Enterprise Digital Twin. We're going to talk a little bit about the simulation and the data involved. Then I'm going to walk you through an example scenario, and we're going to end by discussing the supporting business processes and the results. But before getting into the presentation, I'd like to share with you a short video that explains the kind of contracts that my team supports. Pay attention and see if you can figure out why process modeling and simulation is so important to us. Here we go.
Lockheed Martin listens closely to our training customers around the globe. They consistently tell us they are not satisfied with the status quo in military training, with challenges including obsolete training aircraft and simulators, outdated training methods producing high washout rates, and multiple contracts providing one-size-fits-all solutions that don't properly integrate. Our customers tell us they want innovation in training delivery and acquisition. They want improved training to prepare students for advanced 4th and 5th generation aircraft, a single training contract and a single point of contact. And most important, they want to reduce training cost. Lockheed Martin responds to these needs with an innovative approach that provides a performance-based, integrated training solution delivered as a service. We call this approach turnkey training. Turnkey training delivers a service focused on the training result, not the training equipment. Starting with the desired training outcome, we consider the student entry level, cultural preferences, and available resources. Then we apply systems engineering principles to a customer's unique training needs, combining subject matter expertise with learning science, advanced modeling techniques, and robust cost analysis. The resulting training design delivers the shortest path to effective learning, getting the most from a customer's investment. Business model innovation begins with the decision to acquire training as a performance-based service, rather than the traditional approach of simply acquiring equipment. Flexible ownership models, including private financing options, make training transformation affordable now. The results are impressive. Lockheed Martin turnkey training solutions demonstrate their value in the Republic of Singapore Basic Wings course and the UK Military Flying Training System. Students are learning more, training times are shorter, and training costs are lower. Learn more about Lockheed Martin turnkey training solutions today.
All right, welcome back. I hope now you understand a little bit about turnkey training, but there are a few key points I hope you picked up on. Number one, it's performance-based. That means we only get paid when we produce a finished product that meets or exceeds specifications. We have student candidates coming in one side as the raw material, and graduates are produced at the other end as the finished product. That means we need to avoid costs and maximize return on investment for our customer. But to do that, we have to accurately forecast our program performance. We need to know the rate students are moving through. We need to know how many resources they're using and when. And we need to make sure that we are maximizing the most of the training time that we have. We also, in doing this, need to quantify and mitigate our risks. There is a point where adding resources has a diminishing rate of return. Our job is to hit that sweet spot and make sure we're doing everything to provide the right environment for the student to get through successfully in the shortest amount of time possible. The use cases down below illustrate some points in the program lifecycle. We start with training design validation. So you've got a syllabus. What's that mean? How many aircraft do I have to buy? How many simulators will I need? And how long is it going to take? Will it meet our requirements? We have to create a simulation that's going to forecast that. Then, once the contract is awarded and we start standing up the training site, we need to know, will my instructors be trained on time? Are assets going to be available for them to train on? And then once they are through training, when students start arriving, are we going to have enough to go around, or is there going to be a bottleneck up front? And finally, when we get to a steady state of students coming in, we need to know, what our annual resource profile will look like, because operational needs may change over time. So we have to make sure we have that flexibility to accommodate more or fewer students as needed. We also look at program transitions. Technology changes. There are different upgrades. So if we want to move training from an aircraft to a simulator, or if we want to enhance training with different types of simulations or just upgrade the underlying technology itself, we have to model that transition. That helps us optimize our resources and forecast our key performance indicators, which are generally tied to the things that our customer cares about, which is their students, making sure that they're taking operational billets. We also want to be able to provide scheduling assistance because it is very difficult to predict where somebody will be 2 or 3 courses down the line. For example, everybody who's been to college went through some kind of introductory class, but after that we differentiated into so many different majors. Well, what percentage of students is going down each pipeline? And that's going to determine how facilities are allocated and instructors are allocated and so on. Then we also want to look at our what if analysis because, as I mentioned before, quantifying and mitigating risk depends on our creativity. There are always known unknowns, and there are sometimes unknown unknowns, like what happened with COVID and the pandemic. We need to be able to predict what's going to happen and recommend a path forward to our customers. So so with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the general process of simulation and how we use this concept of a training enterprise twin. You'll notice, first off, that this picture represents a circle. It starts with simulation. It moves on to selection of optimized plans for resource usage. It goes through execution, and then, crucially, the data is returned into the system, and we repeat this process over and over. So many organizations get 1, 2, and 3 done, but sometimes they might only do 1 and 2 once or twice over the span of years. And you never make that link of looking at the data that's coming in from your operations and putting that into your future plan. That's the purpose of a training enterprise digital twin. It's to create this closed loop feedback so that you can use data from execution to drive your continuous improvement. And with that, we'll move on. So what is under the hood of the training enterprise twin? Well, you have at the core of it a simulation built on Simio called the training enterprise model. We have in that 2 different modeling processes. One models the process of students going through training and only the relevant processes. We have found time and time again, and I think there are many experienced modelers in the audience who could agree that modeling everything also has a diminishing rate of return. So we only want to make sure we're modeling the relevant processes needed to get the answers that we want for our customers. So on the program validation model side, we have a student coming in maybe through basic training, and then they'll split up through different pipelines. They might go through fixed wing and then go to jets or multi-engine aircraft. They might just go straight into rotary wing or helicopters. They might be an electronic warfare officer or a navigation officer, but it doesn't end at air training. These could be many other positions. Anytime you have an academic schoolhouse, you can use this program validation model to approximate to simulate your services. And then on the flip side, you have assets that are supporting training and assets that may require a lot of maintenance, like aircraft or simulators. You may want to know rather than having a general availability. Say, I know an aircraft is on average available 80% of the time. That means 20% of the times I go to fly, my training flight will be canceled. Well, what if I already know my planned maintenance ahead of time and just throw in some unplanned maintenance as well? Because depending on how I use my aircraft, I could end up with a massive bottleneck where there are just weeks of people sitting around doing nothing. For example, if I use my aircraft at the same rate, that means they're going to have all their inspections at the same time. They're going to have all their landing gears changed out at the same time, and they're going to have all their engines overhauled at the same time. Nobody wants that to happen because if that were the case, there would be huge gaps in time where you're not getting a constant flow of students. So you've got to make sure to stagger those things and average out usage. I may also have other planned maintenance events that are constraining the availability for training, or maybe I can just use this to prove that the maintenance procedures or the maintenance plans I have in place are good enough to meet the need for training. Because if I say I have an aircraft that's available 85% of the time, then I need to be able to prove it. And I need to make sure that anything that we plan for maintenance is not getting in the way of the training because I'm not getting paid for aircraft, I'm getting paid to produce students. So, all right, so now we've got the program validation model. We've also got a sustainment and logistics model. These are tied into a database that interfaces with the exterior systems. It may take in information from data analytics and put that information in as updated parameters. Of course, we are going to support dashboards because that's how decisions get made. And then where applicable, we may send information out to a scheduling portal. So now that we've talked about what's under the hood, let's take a little bit deeper dive and see what data goes into and is produced by the training enterprise model. Starting on the left, let's just go down the list of inputs. It starts with a training syllabi. You have pipelines that are made up of courses and courses that are made up of lessons and lessons that are made up of training events. Understanding how students move through these pipelines is critical to making sure that you are simulating the process accurately. You look at the next thing, which is attrition percentages. We understand that unfortunately, not everybody who starts is going to finish. We can look at attrition either assuming students get all the way through and then fail just at the very end, or maybe there are different points along the way where students undergo a knowledge check and have to unfortunately drop out or get held back. The next thing we consider is availability of either instructors or training devices like the simulators or aircraft themselves. Oftentimes, you might get a mix of military and contract instructors. Military instructors are not always available. They have other duties that come up that will take them away from training, and they might need to be supplemented with contract instructors, or training may just simply need to be delayed until they are available. The training device availability itself is pretty straightforward. You have things that happen that are unexpected, such as bird strikes, or perhaps you have other types of unforeseen maintenance. Maybe a student landed too hard and now you have to fix their landing gear. Then there's continuation training. Instructors need to stay sharp. They also require use of training resources, whether it's flying in a simulator or an aircraft. Then you must consider crew rest and duty days. We are human beings and we require rest, and rest means that you're safe when you are flying. So crew rest is a requirement, and you must not train 24/7 unless you have the requisite number of instructors that can cover those shifts. Student duty days, likewise, they also need their rest. It's just another way of accounting of saying the name that accounts for that time. And then next up, you look at deployments. The weather in northern latitudes is not always as nice as it is in the center of the Earth. So you may want to take some of your personnel and go to another spot to train. That means taking some amount of resources with you and doing training at a separate place, and perhaps some stay back and continue training on the base site. You also have event repeats or reflies. This is when maybe you failed a knowledge check and you have to try again. You consider other things like pre and post event activities, walking to and from, anything that takes time away from training should be considered in the simulation where it's relevant, where it makes sense. Sickness is not typically used in planning. However, it can be used to look at impacts that may have been unexpected if for us, unfortunately, like COVID or some other illness might be going around. There's other types of sickness too, such as motion sickness. A person may be out permanently for a week, or it might just be they can do an academic lesson, but don't put them in the simulator right now or put them in an aircraft because they might throw up everywhere. Of course, you consider working hours and then weather delays. Weather is probably the biggest factor in terms of flying training because it is the most unpredictable thing. Despite as good as despite how good we've gotten in recent years at forecast, weather still creates the greatest variance in training time, as you'll see later in an example. And lastly, maintenance, and it can be considered one of two ways, as I alluded to previously, just as an availability factor or as a discrete maintenance plan. Now, we've run through the simulation, and let's take a look at our outputs. The simulation produces gigabytes of Gantt charts. You know everything there is to know about a student, what they're doing at each point in time of their day, the simulated point in time, that is. You know about the instructor, and you know about the asset. Now we need to aggregate those things and using the Monte Carlo simulation and figure out how to make decisions based on those outputs. Some of the things we look at: time to train predictions. Will a student graduate on time? How is that going to affect our key performance indicator, making sure that we get the number of graduates we need this year? We look at daily student and class loads because we need to know if our facilities footprint is adequate to handle all the training. We look at the live platform availability based on planned maintenance and perhaps even unplanned maintenance. Or we could just use the training schedule to help plan our maintenance windows. And then I mentioned Gantt charts. Let's mention Gantt charts again, because that's obviously what is needed to support scheduling. So those outputs combined help us make the decisions, and we'll get into that right now with an example. All right, now that we've had a chance to talk about the business processes, let's walk through a scenario. We're going to evaluate a very simple use case, a syllabus change. These things happen actually fairly frequently, but the one we're investigating here is a case where we want to offload training from an aircraft to a simulator. Why would we do that? Well, it's cheaper to just use to build a simulator and run it than it is to maintain an aircraft for training. And every time you're using an aircraft, even if it's just something as simple as looking at an instrument panel to familiarize yourself with layout, that takes time away from flying. So we want to maximize the use of that aircraft for flying because it's the only thing that can do that. Whereas a simulator can be used for a lot of different reasons: air cockpit familiarization, basic procedures, um, and just even practice. So in this scenario, we are going to look at two syllabi. One is the basic syllabus, which just has your standard aircraft and simulators, and then the basic hybrid, which offloads some of that training from an aircraft onto a simulator. So we're hoping to get some kind of improvement. And we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at training time, we're going to look at annual graduation rates, and then we're going to ask ourselves, does the facility footprint change, or what is the maximum student load with this new approach? And we're going to assume that the number of students entering the system remains constant for simplicity, and we're also going to assume that the number of resources remains constant. The only thing we are doing is just changing how we train something, moving it from an aircraft to a simulator in this example. And we're going to run several scenarios. So we're going to run with weather or with no weather. That's the NW indicator here. And we're going to run with weather for both scenarios. And I think you'll find this kind of interesting because you'll see what the impact of weather really is. We're going to run different sets of replications, and we're going to turn off sickness because that can mess with the planning. We're going to make it so that aircraft availability or device availability is a factor. We're going to make it so that these things can have failures, so there's some uncertainty in these things. And then, like I mentioned, weather is either going to be on or off, but the rest of the devices are going to remain the same. And all these names are just indicators for different devices. And we're also going to keep the instructors the same. So we're going to have a qualified flight instructor, we're going to have a sim instructors, and so on and so forth. So let's take a look at the outcomes. Let's start with the training time. So here we had a requirement, I forgot to mention on the first slide, of a training time of 180 days. And we do train students in basic and basic hybrid. We also have flight instructor courses or qualified flight instructor courses and rear crew courses that take place. Those represent a demand on the training asset. But we're just going to focus on these top two for right now. So just right off the start, at 180 days, we noticed with the basic syllabus, if we were running without weather, you would see that we would meet the requirement almost 99% of the time. But, or excuse me, all of the time, actually, that's this unboxed thing here. And if we run with weather, now we're only meeting that requirement maybe 60% of the time. These are box plots, so this represents the bottom quartile, middle quartile, another quartile, and then the last 25%, with the line here being the average training time. So that's not that great. But when we move to the basic hybrid syllabus, obviously our training time reduces without weather. You can see it's a complete shift down. There is some still variability in here without the weather because we turned on there's variability because we turned on instructor and device availability and failures. So that accounts for the spread. But you'll notice the increase in standard deviation, the massive increase in standard deviation is caused by weather. So on the basic hybrid syllabus, when you move something off of the aircraft onto a training device, you get an incredible improvement in training time, something around 25 calendar days faster. So you are now almost guaranteed to meet your requirement nearly all the time, except in the worst case. So that's great news. Okay, now our contract is performance based. So let's take a look at something, how we get paid, which is the key performance indicators. And we didn't change our student throughput, and you'll notice training took 180 days. So when you get to a steady state point, which is what's kind of represented here by the middle year, we ramp up with from 0 students in the system to a max load and then ramp down. Graduation rate doesn't change because there's no new students coming in and you're still training within the 365-day period. So in our case, based on how the courses start, we're going to be okay. Whether we continue as we did before or use the new syllabus, we're still going to graduate the same number of students. And this is even, and the orange indicates, we put in percentages for attrition. Usually it's not such an interesting statistic because whatever your attrition rate is, you just lop off that percent at the end, and that's what's indicated by the orange. Okay, now let's move to the last piece of the example, which is our daily student load. And because we're getting students through faster, you'll notice that the hybrid syllabus has a peak of around 60 students, whereas the basic syllabus had a peak of around 75, 75 students. So that's good news because if you wanted to have less, if you had to have less facility space for your students, then you could get away with that and potentially use that extra room for maybe extra simulator area if you needed it, or maybe another some other function. So that concludes our example and why this decision making is so impactful. We want to run these analysis on a regular basis, and we just scratched the tip of the iceberg because there's hundreds of parameters that you can change in this model, and each of them can represent a different insight depending on what situation you are up against. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about the supporting business processes for the training enterprise digital twin. And in our world, I've worked to separate the modeling job from the analyst job. While it's true that some people are able to do both, I find these people are rare to find. They're highly paid consultants. It's difficult to get their attention. And the problem is, if they leave the company, then we lose our expertise. So I focused on building a team of modelers whose job is specifically to understand the product. And I've also trained analyst whose job it is to understand the customer requirements and manage that interface and generate the reports that our customers are using to make decisions. So you'll notice in the analyst side, it's all about the reports. You start with an updating of the baseline data. You'll run a simulation. You'll verify that results match history or expectation, update baseline data as needed, and then you might find that you need to deconflict schedules, and then you'll update your baseline data again, and then you get to a point where you're ready to present the outcomes to stakeholders and review the reports. They will select a formal course of action, and the cycle will continue. While it's true that in some cases you could automate this, I found that having an analyst, especially during a program startup, is necessary because the one thing you do not want to have is you don't want to have people who don't understand the underlying model or the concept of modeling trying to interpret the results because they could be wrong, or you might have someone that will not not understand the need to get current data. We've actually experienced programs where we started out with modeling, and then the model was never updated. Customers never changed the underlying input information, and then when it was wrong later, they wondered why, or they thought the modeling was terrible, and it took years to fix this reputation. And it's only recently that we've worked around those past uh, perceptions, and the reason is because they hired an external PhD to come in and explain that no, to in order to get the answers you understand, you actually need to do this modeling. So I'm also trying to impart to our customers that having a requirement to produce these reports using simulation is necessary because that's what's going to drive the decision making. You have to tie not only have to have scope of work in there for your analysts with a modeling and simulation plan, you also need to make sure that whatever contract outcomes you're trying to achieve, whether it's number of instructors you plan to hire and that has to be negotiated with somebody, anything that you're trying to negotiate, it needs to be on a contract that spells out there's a connection between the simulation and the decision making so that you get that feedback loop and you can achieve that continuous improvement. And then on the flip side, with the modelers, what we're trying to do is build out a product. Why this is important is because the product that we're building is is a discrete simulation, true, but it's complex. It's been built up over a period of years and hours upon hours of interactions with stakeholders. And every time we got a new data set, we would learn something different. So that's what uh, necessitates having modelers as their own separate skill. And while it's true modelers could be analysts and analysts could be modelers, again, it uh, the nature of the beast is such that we just don't have the time to do both. Another experience I've had on a contract is just like I mentioned before, they hire an expert to come in and build a model for them. But then this gentleman, he was near retirement and he took off the summer to go play golf. What then? They had to hire a consulting company to do all the testing and verification, and they eventually got around to it. But if they needed to make changes to that model, it wasn't going to happen. They couldn't just do it quickly because they didn't understand the customer side of it. So the benefit of having so there is some downside not to having that intimacy and being an analyst and a modeler. However, I've been fortunate enough on our team that we can have both work on the same product, and that's what's really driven our success. Okay, so now let's wrap up by talking about results. First and foremost, I think improved stakeholder communication is probably the biggest benefit or one of the biggest benefits of the modeling work because it means there's no surprises. The customer knows exactly what to expect because it's in our forecasts. They can see what happens when we plan maintenance for outages, or if the subcontractor is maintaining aircraft, then they can see when planned outages are available, or they can look at the training demand and make sure they have the requisite number of aircraft to fly, or to make sure that if you're running your simulators so often, you do make time for some of that maintenance or software upgrades or whatever else, because if you don't, eventually you're going to be down for some time while that aircraft is has maintenance being performed on it or the simulator has a software upgrade. So it keeps a regular cadence when you have forecasts of these events. One other thing many um, customers struggle with is forecasting when their class dates will start. It's easy enough to know that when students come in, you're going to start whatever your first course is. But what happens 2 or 3 courses down the line, especially when students split off into different specialties? And what happens 3 or 4 courses down the line after that when students come back into place? I look at it like trying to play a game of Monopoly and predicting which square you're going to land on 20 moves from now. You know kind of roughly where you expect to be on the board, but you always have to update your forecast after every roll to know exactly what's coming. These modeling results have also been very impactful to our business because they can result in significant cost avoidance in terms of asset procurement and even scheduling labor. But speaking of asset procurement, think about the cost of an airplane. Just the purchase cost is pretty high, but now think about the sustainment cost of that airplane. It might be 3 times the price of the aircraft. So if you can prove that you can train with fewer aircraft, you may have saved tens of millions of dollars. And I think the last thing is the realistic goals. I mentioned that this improves stakeholder communication and setting realistic goals for these operational needs, understanding what resource constraints are in place. I think that's just an outcome of a natural outcome of the modeling. And the diagram I have on the right shows that we support decisions throughout the program lifecycle. We have solution development, stand up, and service delivery. In solution development, you're just trying to size the system, just answering the question of how many resources do I think we're going to need to execute this program. We've developed custom code to do this work. I think we could do that now with Simio OptQuest if we desire. But for now, the tool we have works because it doesn't require a lot of data. And early on in solution development, you don't need a lot of data because you're just adding guests on top of guests at some point. But then we do transition to Traeser in the solution development when we really want to sharpen the pencil and understand what the true constraints are. When we go into program stand up, we've got assets arriving, students being trained, or instructors being trained in preparation for students to arrive. And then once they are trained, you have trained the trainer, and then you might train subsequent instructors, and then you move on to students. So all the while, you've got to make sure that the asset cadence is keeping up with the demand so that you don't slip and miss a deadline. And then finally, we get into service delivery or steady state, which is kind of what we've been talking about all along. So I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me, and I hope you'll understand a little bit more about why discrete simulation and Simio has been such an important asset to us in the pursuit of training service programs. Thank you, and I'll take your questions now.
Hi, Justin. It's been a while. Good to see you. That's Chester Will. I can't hear you if you're responding back. Don't know if that's others are
Oh,
experiencing the same.
got it.
There we go. Great, great. How are you doing this afternoon?
Good, thanks, and good to see you
Good,
too.
good. Well, we got a few questions here. We'll just go ahead and jump straight into it. So how often are the customers that you talked about, how often are they familiar with simulation just as a practice in general? And how often do you feel like you're kind of educating, through that initial process?
Thanks, Ryan. Actually, it is pretty rare to find a customer that has familiarity with simulation, at least to the level where they understand the benefits and know what questions to ask. So and in our case, our situation's exacerbated by the fact that we have military customers that will rotate every 2 to 3 years or even potentially more often. To address
Mhm.
that, we've developed our own customer onboarding material to explain what modeling is and what benefits it provides. We also educate them on our stakeholder engagement process and make sure that they are aware of the touch points and resources they have available to them so that we can build the trust in the process and in the modeling forecasts.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the next question here. I think kind of in the similar spirit with entering with engagements with new customers, how much scoping, and can you give us a sense of what that scoping looks like when you're entering a new project engagement?
Sure. So with the scoping effort, a lot of the type of modeling that we do is actually repeatable. So we're able to take the model that we've used from one customer to the next. So the challenge for the scope has to do with things like what is the input data. Typically, the syllabi are pretty involved, and it may take a few weeks to even get the data entered properly the first time so that you have the right baseline. And
Mhm.
then beyond that, you may find that the customer wants unique reports or in a slightly different format, or you may find that a customer wants to integrate our model with some exterior data source, and that, of course, takes longer and longer as you go. If it's
Mhm.
if it's simply a matter of just getting the input data in, then then that's just a few weeks and you're up and running.
Okay. So just to double down on that a little bit, it seems if it's you've got kind of like your core competency that you can model with the data, but then if there's specialized cases, you're going to have to get into maybe some process logic situations or even just model modifications to represent that constraint or situation.
We are fortunate to be at the point where it's rare that we run into a logic modification. Although I know that since you've been working with our team periodically, you
Mm-hmm.
you see those come across, and we do still have a few more in our backlog.
Yeah. I should have mentioned I've had the benefit of supporting the Tracer project for through our hypercare engagement. So I can't assist in any of the technical questions that may come up as well. But all right, let's move on to the next question. What type of data is usually utilized in to represent these training programs and the requirements that come along with it? And can you talk a little bit about like the data collection and preparation process for that as well?
Of course. So the data that we use in there was um, we discussed that a little bit during slide 6 and the
Mhm.
presentation. So you'll be able to go back and review. We have a list of kind of the input and output data uh, that we collect. As far as preparation, or as far as other collection efforts go, a lot of it, um, the other major factors tend to be maintenance, turnaround time, or weather data. Uh, but a lot of times, each customer will have different systems that are available to us. And so ideally, we're looking for a situation where they have an integrated data environment, they've got a data governance plan in place. And so if there is additional data that needs to be collected, that will be fed back through the system as a requirement and then provided to us. You may have noticed from our my business process though at the end that our analysts can tend to be pretty involved, and that's because source systems, you have one unique source system for each customer, and if customers are trying to collaborate, then you've got potentially dozens of different source systems. And fortunately, Mandralic integration is is still necessary even in this day and age.
Sure, sure. And I guess some of the tools, what are some of the tools maybe that you all would use for some of that data collection or preparation, if any, you could share?
It's as far as collection goes, it's it usually starts with stakeholder interviews.
Hmm.
We maintain a regular schedule of stakeholder interviews to get some of the necessary data. Of course, in cases where we've identified, we have repeating requests for updates. In those cases, we may spend the time to go develop a script, put put it and put that information in a staging database that we can use to run the model.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Let's move on to the next question here. What are some of the unique constraints that present themselves when modeling this training program? And if you can share any of the modeling approaches you took to modeling those constraints as well.
Sure. As most of our customers are involved in flight training, some of the unique constraints have to do with the uh, cases where either instructors or assets are used for events outside of training, or there may be unique operating constraints for airspaces. So representing those requires some creativity in the input data. Fortunately, our inputs are flexible enough that we don't have to always make the logical updates. We always start
Mhm.
there. We say, how can we do modify our inputs to get the expected result before going through a logic update? Because as you know from your personal experience, that can be a very
Mhm.
involved process. And
Mhm.
so we've structured our simulation and inputs such that we are able to add constraints um, very flexibly to where they appear.
That's great. Yeah, definitely leaning on the data-driven piece of our solution to employ that. I mean, data created as well. I know the model is predominantly data generated, so that's great. All right, I think we could move on to the next question here. Are there any like key takeaways from this modeling effort that you think other organizations broadly considering maybe training employee training programs could take away from this and apply to their modeling efforts or analysis efforts that they're doing?
Hard to say with the in terms of employee training programs. This type of modeling was designed specifically for what I would call schoolhouse modeling. So
Okay.
anytime where you have somewhat of a either known or variable student intake, but you have to either produce some students within a given time, or you need certain number of people by certain dates. Uh, that's where you that's where this particular model is is key. I think as far as general training programs go, my suggestion is to build a data or have a data governance plan in place so that you are constantly looking at what metrics do you need to collect about your organization so that you can faithfully forecast outcomes,
Mhm.
especially in the things that drive your costs.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit there, I think that the cost side piece is related. If there's any major drivers for the cost of the training program, where it be a resource investment or some type of the facility requirements, if you could size those, kind of in the forecasting that you talked about, throughout whatever run horizon you're looking to run on, I think that'd probably be the biggest benefit and trade-off that I could think of to utilize this for a training program. So. But great. Yeah, I think we'll move on to the next question here. I think we just got a couple of more. When you're running the model, can you give us a sense of what the typical run horizon is for your customers? I think there's an example here, but like, are they looking for over the full year, over a 5 year, over a 10 year? What's that look like?
Here, it kind of depends on what phase of the program that the customer is in. So, if you recall, kind of on my last slide, I have three various phases. I have solution development, stand up, and then I have service, what I call service delivery, which or other sometimes referred to as steady state.
Mhm.
In the solution development time frame of like that's usually before a contract happens or very early on, you will want to run the model for the entire period of performance, or at least until it gets up to a steady state scenario where you have a relatively constant number of students coming in.
Mhm.
And then if you actually know where you're, so for that might be anywhere from 5 to 10 years. Although frankly, once you get to steady state, not too much changes other than the weather, unless you know something's going to come up in year 6 or 7. For cases where you are in stand up or service delivery, you're constantly looking for what's that next year forecast. So that'll be 1 to 2 years. And when you're in steady state, you want to know, what am I doing next week or in the next 6 months?
Mhm.
And so that's actually a more recent focus for us, is providing the short to medium range, which I call a 1 week to 6 month time frame, or with
Mhm.
our ultimate goal being to provide the operation scheduling support for a couple of years. And I say support because I found that no two programs schedule alike, and no two
Mhm.
people on those programs schedule alike. So
Mhm.
having a consistent process that everyone agrees upon is actually kind of the first step. before we get to what I would say, fully automated schedule generation.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm sure like maybe the inputs and output considerations there for whether you're trying to do the near term run, kind of on the 1 to 2 week look are very different than the 1 to 2 year look.
Definitely. And the other thing that I have to remind everyone of with scheduling is you assume everything goes to plan. So you turn off
Mhm.
variability. You're not looking at
Right.
a Monte Carlo analysis. You want to know what Ryan's doing at 1:47 p.m.
Hmm.
today. So that's a different question than what might he be doing a
What
year from
could?
now. Yeah,
Right, right. Yeah, and all the possible things Brian could be doing a year from now too, right?
right.
Yeah. Right. All right, thanks. I think we just have one more here to wrap us up. So you mentioned kind of in the outputs that you're using a lot of the Gantt charts within Simio to review the results. Can you give us a sense of the other visualization tools you might use, and whether it's the Simio dashboards or any other outside applications and how they fit into the solution here?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that we just use Simio dashboards, but actually that's probably our least used product. We mostly
Hmm.
just use the and because the reason is we already have enterprise servers for Tableau,
Right.
and Power BI is starting to pop up more often. So everything so we build example charts in Tableau, but then we actually have several customers that are on Power BI, so we had to convert all our charts
Mm,
into their format. And I also recognize too that we're very much engineers and analysts. We're not like the UI UX people, so I apologize for my charts earlier in terms of their nature of their colors, because I know I noticed they were kind of tiny on the screen. So that doesn't happen once you get it through a formal business intelligence team. You get
I'm
much
sure
nicer
the audience here
interfaces.
is
Hmm.
familiar with those types of views, so that's all good. And I'm sure that's a very customer driven, right? On kind of their expected outcomes and where they want the data, right? Like if they're a Tableau user, I'm sure that you're going to go that route. So, well, thank you, Justin. Really appreciate the time and the great presentation, giving us the insight of I would say even like a really unique simulation approach here. So, giving some others a different thing to think about. So, again, appreciate the time and hope to see you all here for our Simio Sync tomorrow.
My pleasure. Take care.